Kasane Teto is everywhere right now. For all of 2025 and honestly most of 2024 too, she's felt inescapable, popping up in hit song after hit song, flooding people's feeds, constantly appearing in memes, edits, and being fully adopted into brainrot humour. Even the Roblox kids have found her now. I mean, just recently we had a whole hoax about Teto being added to Fortnite, and I will admit I did fall victim to the hype of it for a moment, but honestly it's insane to think that a character that was basically unknown outside of dedicated Vocaloid circles has grown so mainstream to the point that her being added to Fortnite seemed like a genuine possibility. I mean, I still wouldn't discount it entirely, but it is obviously an audience there if Twindra wants to pursue that. I would download it again if I could make Miku and Teto fight. It's been a long journey for Teto. She was originally conceived in 2008 as an April Fool's Day joke, a fake Vocaloid designed to prank the fandom. The plan was to convince fans that she was going to be the 4th character vocal synth released on the Krypton Future Media, coming after Miku and Rin and Len. Trolls on Japanese Textboard 2 channel created her design, personality, and even a fake demo song. So she was already supposed to exist beyond the 1st of April 2008, but somehow she caught on, the concept of a fake Vocaloid desperate to be real, capturing fans' attention. And then she was reborn as a new Tao, a free vocal synth program, becoming the face of that software in the same way Kasane Miku is the face of Vocaloid. From that hoax came something real, a new star who dreamed of becoming a true Vocaloid. And in a way, she finally has. The thing that really propelled her into the mainstream was the release of her easily tunable, human-like synth VAI voice bank. It's very user-friendly and has clear English pronunciation, and with a couple of big hits and the cultural force that was Mesmerizer, she was everywhere online. If you're interested in hearing about her story in more detail, I've already made a video that goes over her creation and her life up till now. And personally, I love the evolution of Teto. It feels like such a classic underdog story. I'm so happy that she's finally made it to the mainstream, finally achieving her dream in living at large as the #2 vocal synth. I mean, no one can ever really take over Miku's #1 spot. But yeah, if you told me 5 years ago to pick a vocal synth to go so viral, I probably would have picked her. It feels like out of all these different synths, she sort of deserves it the most, the non-Vocaloid who really wants to be a part of a gang. It's like the completion of a character arc. And again, it's also a symbol of how much the vocal synth scene has evolved from the early days, this indie success story crossing over to the mainstream. However, as with everything that becomes rapidly popular in a fairly short space of time, there has been some backlash. For many, there's just too much Teto. I've noticed more and more fatigue creeping in from certain corners of the fandom, especially on TikTok, but even in like the occasional Reddit thread. The idea that she is ruining the fandom, that her fans are insufferable, that we are somehow worse off as a community because Teto is popular. Others feel that her voice is uninteresting, too samey, and much less diverse when it comes to tuning. That Miku-Teto duets are all just derivative of each other, that her overuse has made popular Vocaloid content feel very homogenous. That her fans are just too loud and too defensive, that every conversation somehow circles back to her. Even those who don't dislike Teto are starting to feel like she's crowding every other vocal synth out. A few even say that she wished she had stayed small, that her popularity cheapens what she once represented, the less corporate, more rough and indie side of vocal synths. But backlash like this isn't unique to just Teto. It is one of the oldest patterns in fandom and just pop culture in general. Something starts underground, has dedicated fans, gains traction, becomes beloved by a wider audience, and inevitably becomes overexposed. And of course, when something just feels too popular, a lot of the appeal can die. The novelty fades, people start calling it overrated. When everyone's talking about something you used to quietly love, it stops feeling like your thing. You stop feeling special for being a fan. What was once niche and personal turns so public and loud. It's everyone's thing now. Hell, I wonder if people ever felt the same way about Miku during her first wave of popularity up to like 2010. And by the way, this definitely isn't the first time a vocal synth character has risen in popularity to stand next to Miku. Luca and Gumi have both experienced similar booms in the past, although arguably never quite to this level. It's an established pattern in Vocaloid and fandom spaces in general. Every few years, the cycle restarts. Niche, hype, saturation, backlash, renewal. It's not something that just applies to one character or fanbase. Still, I think it's worth examining all the different issues that people have had with Teto and looking at the different arguments that are put forth. Because some people do have some very genuine, well thought out criticisms, and others slightly less so. And I think it's also important to look at the different criticisms coming from different parts of the fandom, the contrast between older and newer fans, and different social media platforms. I think we should also ask, why Teto? Why now? And why does she seem to incite such strong reactions? I remember living through the Gumi boom and never seeing anywhere near this much discourse. So in this video I want to kind of casually explore the so-called Teto problem, looking not just at the critiques themselves, that she's overrated, overused, repetitive, annoying, but also at where these feelings come from and what they mean in the context of the wider Vocaloid fandom and even just fandom in general. I want to look at how these trends change over time and whether the Teto backlash could potentially lead us to an entirely new phase in the vocal synth ecosystem. Because, in my opinion, this does just feel like a natural phase in the long history of vocal synths, and will probably be looked back on fondly in another decade's time. And at the very least, Teto is doing a much better job of keeping the scene alive than she is at killing it. The main question I keep circling back to is, why is it Teto specifically that's getting so much backlash? It's not unheard of for Vocaloids to have a few years of higher popularity, although never to this extent before. And whilst there's a lot of complaints to do with Teto but aren't actually to do with her as a vocal synth character, like oversaturation and lazy content, the fact that it's Teto rather than any other vocal synth that has risen to such overwhelming fame has rubbed a lot of older fans up the wrong way. I think it's in that transition from Utal to Synthy. Before, she used to represent something that official Vocaloids just didn't. She belonged to fans before she belonged to a company. She was born from community collaboration and experimentation. And that meant that when you supported Teto, it felt like you were supporting the more independent parts of the scene. It felt like she kept a lot of the spirit of like the very early Vocaloid community, before a lot of brand deals and excessive merchandise, the kind of roots that built the entire space. So watching her become the new face of Vocaloid as a Synthy AI, it was a big change. I mean, she'd been the scrappy underdog for so long. She'd been a Utal for 15 years, and then suddenly she's the new establishment. And I don't think the issue is so much that she is popular either, although some people definitely do lose interest in things when they just become bigger. I think it's the fact that for people who really did love Utal Teto, the version of her that is most popular just doesn't represent what Teto stood for. It's the end of an entire era. Teto had never really felt corporate like Miku. She belonged to a free software company, but now she kind of feels like an indie artist who hit the mainstream and now have to pay like triple the ticket prices for her new tour. She's sort of stuck between two worlds, both official and fan-driven, and I think that space is where that tension has kind of built. When you love something that's suddenly loved by everyone, when the thing you like first is changed by all these new fans, it can start to feel like something is being taken away from you. She acts as a tangible reminder that a lot of the older ways of creating, sharing, and discovering Vocaloid music are fading. She represents a very big change in the community. Like, I would categorize everything since her rise as an entirely new era of Vocaloid, and it's not exactly clear when this era is going to end, or what it's going to evolve into. I don't think it's as simple as older fans simply disliking something because it's not as niche or quirky anymore. Like, I find that one thing that a lot of people outside the community fail to realise about Vocaloid is that the vocal synths often have these community-built characterizations and stories built around them, leading to their usage in certain songs. Like the jokes about Len frequently dying, or Rin being used in a lot of songs with darker, slightly more depressing themes. So the fandom has an idea of what songs go with which synths, and I think that Teto has disrupted that a lot by suddenly becoming a much more generic and popular voice in the scene. 15 years of building this character has sort of vanished overnight. And there is this disconnect between newer fans who haven't really seen Utal Teto or know her long history. She represents these two completely different fandom values at the same time. Because for a lot of newer fans, she's simply a fun, cute, expressive voice and a catchy sound. Like, I've been seeing so many Teto isn't a Vocaloid comments recently, and obviously that is a canon event for anyone joining the Vocaloid fandom, but it does put into perspective how many new people are joining who, like, don't really understand why some of the older fans can be put off by this new version of Teto. And again, that's very much not the fault of newer fans, but it does mean that there's a pretty big split in the fandom. Like, I feel like in the years to come, this is kind of going to be a point of a generational divide. I will say there are plenty of older fans who are very, very happy with her being so popular and seeing her rise so far to this sort of level of stardom. I mean, me personally, I listen to a decent amount of Utal Teto covers and stuff, but not really that much original content. So, like, I'm enjoying the fact that she's used a lot more on original songs. But yeah, now that we've discussed some of the issues that arise with it being Teto specifically that are so popular, I think we can move on to some of the more general complaints. So the biggest complaint that I do see the most is just that of oversaturation and just general fatigue at seeing Teto dominate the subgenre so much, especially when it comes to like memes and general internet relevance. The 2024 was sort of the year of her rise, but 2025 is definitely the year of her reign. She's still at the top, and people are starting to feel it. It's something I've noticed being brought up more and more often in discussions online. Again, most of these are on TikTok or Reels, where people do have a tendency to be faster and sharper, and also more inflammatory with their comments than on other platforms. But I have seen it spilling over onto like Reddit threads and YouTube comment sections too. I'm not on any form of Twitter, never mind Vocaloid Twitter, but knowing the nature of the site and how it actively encourages people to be argumentative and make controversial takes, I'm sure it's appeared on there too. She really is inescapable across almost all social media platforms, and what was once a novelty, the collective joy of Teto finally making it big, has honestly just started to feel a little bit like background noise. At first, the sheer saturation was something really fresh and interesting. It's normal for vocal synths to gain and lose popularity over the years as trends shift, but I don't think Teto was on anyone's horizons for being the next big vocal synth. Seeing her appear in more and more songs, overtaking other synths in terms of views and tracks and cultural relevance, popping up a new fan art every day, it was really exciting! Plus, it also served as another reminder that the vocal synth community is definitely not dead. We can create new trends organically and break out of Vocaloid spaces and into the more mainstream parts of the internet. But one of the things that I think is notable about the Vocaloid fandom in contrast to other fandoms is that we never really let things go, for better and for worse. That's why all these songs from over 15 years ago are still widely discussed and held as cultural touchstones for new fans, referenced, reinterpreted, and covered to this day. The original hits just have this reverential status, and I think this has contributed to the fact that the fandom doesn't really have these super short trend cycles like the rest of the internet. Memes, voice banks, styles of songs can stay popular for a decent amount of time, contrasting with how quickly things are buried these days. When we have something, we tend to keep it going. Like, it's why even a year after its initial boom, I'm still seeing some Teto content in my feed, but then again, that is also my fault for still liking all the posts I see. But again, that is the problem with algorithmic virality, is that it never quite knows when to stop. Once a character or sound catches on, the platforms keep pushing it back to you, and as long as you're engaged, you'll see more, no matter if you're actually enjoying what you're seeing. Every scroll, every recommendation is another chance for the algorithm to push some more Teto content on you. Even complaining about her makes you more likely to see more content, as the algorithm recognises you've commented on some Teto content. Plus, I'd find from my personal experience that all vocal sim content tends to get shoved under one big algorithmic label, so if you're a massive Kaito fan, you've probably still been pushed a ton of Teto content recently, whether you asked for it or not. The result is even that people who don't dislike her do start feeling worn down. You don't even have to be invested in Teto to feel her presence. She's just there, on your timeline, in your playlist, on your Insta feed. And also because of the way these algorithms work, the brainrot Teto content has led to it being seen by far more than just dedicated Vocaloid fans. This has led to a flood of new fans, many being more Teto fans rather than Vocaloid fans, and again this has become a slight point of conflict for some older fans. Now, I do want to say that becoming a Vocaloid fan is so much more difficult than joining most other fandoms. There's so many different aspects to it, an amount of songs and memes and jokes and knowledge that I've all accumulated over the past couple of decades. Like, I have had a video on how to get into Vocaloid as a work in progress for like the last 6 months. It does take time to gain what seems like even the most surface level and basic facts, like Teto being a new Tao. Well, at least she used to be a new Tao. Plus, it's a very active fandom. There's always new music, new merch, new concerts. It's not like a TV show where you just have to watch the show and then that's it. You've got to stay on top of this stuff. So I would say it's difficult to be a new fan. But I think the issue is when there's so many new fans coming in at once, it can be very frustrating to see the same misunderstandings and discourse be repeated again and again and again. And for me, I don't mind when new fans don't know something, as long as they're putting in the effort to correct themselves and not actively spreading blatant misinformation or presenting opinion as fact. There is an issue where, since Teto has honestly just become quite trendy and Vocaloid and anime culture is no longer socially unacceptable as it used to be, there is definitely a small subset of fans who just aren't really interested in actually becoming a Vocaloid fan. They're just more of like a Teto fan, or kind of just really invested in all of the memes and brainrot in general. Like, some are just here because it's on trend. And that can be kind of frustrating to see for fans who are a bit more interested in vocal sims. Again, I do think this is a very small minority of new fans, and not like an important issue in the grand scheme of things, but like, if you're gonna go online and make a video about how much you like a popular new Teto song, it might be worth taking 5 minutes to Google the song and to make sure you credit the producer and not sound like you think it was Teto that made that song. And personally, I do find it interesting that for once, the backlash isn't coming from like outside the fandom. Like I was saying, Vocaloid is fairly cool now, or at least not gonna like socially isolate you. I managed to get on this just before the mythical great shift that some weebs like to talk about, although I'm not really sure if that's a real thing, and also I think placing it in 2020 is a bit too early. For me, it felt more like 2022, because everything that happened during COVID was a bit of a fever dream. But when I first joined the fandom, Miku was still a lame anime girl singing annoying high-pitched chipmunk music to most of my peers. But in the past couple of years, people who I talked about have actually heard of Miku or think that is kind of interesting. And that is partially a maturity factor, but also it just speaks to the fact that Vocaloid is far more mainstream than it ever has been. Miku is in Sonic Racers. So, with this rise of Teto fatigue, most of it is coming from within the fandom, while the rest of the internet seems very happy to keep pumping out Teto meme content. There's a very specific kind of burnout I'm seeing, one that comes from watching the thing you love go from niche to omnipresent. I don't think it's necessarily hatred or even a dislike for Teto, but just sheer exhaustion with how she seems to be everywhere. And again, there is that additional issue where this isn't quite the same Teto that used to be popular with the older fandom. Like, even her hair colour has shifted slightly, the same way that Miku shifted from being seen as more green to more blue. But I really do hope that these new fans stick around and get to be a part of whatever the next stage of Vocaloid history is. I mean, everyone has to join at some point. I know quite a few people watching this didn't get to join in 2007 due to not actually being alive back then. Hell, by a lot of people's standards, I am technically a new gen too. Like, this has only been my #1 interest for about a third of my life. So what I want to emphasize is that I do love all the new fans coming in. That's part of why I started making these videos. And not having been a part of the old fandom doesn't make you a lesser Vocaloid fan by any means. But I just want to describe where there can be quite a bit of conflict between these different groups in the fandom, and especially between older and newer fans. But overall, when a lot of people say they're sick of Teto's oversaturation, I don't think they're making a critical judgment so much of her as a voice bank or a character. I think it's more of just a kind of sensory overload. She's too loud, too present, too everywhere. I don't think it's so much about the quality of her songs necessarily, although we will get onto that in a moment, but the density of them. She feels algorithmically overworked. And that means she's starting to feel a lot less like a character with personality, a voice bank with a lot to say, but a shorthand for internet noise. Also, I do want to say, I don't think fatigue is the fault of anyone participating in any Teto trends. I think the biggest part of the blame just goes to how fast everything is online these days. Trends live and die within weeks when they used to live on for years. Even Vocaloid, which, as I mentioned, is kind of notorious for not letting things go, used to operate on a much slower scale. Songs would go viral on Nico Nico, build up a dedicated following, get remixed, covers, have multiple music videos drawn for them, and sometimes only reach the rest inside of fandom on YouTube a few months later. Now, a new Teto song can drop and reach like 1 million views and be completely forgotten about in another 2 weeks. The shelf life of trends has never been shorter, and Teto just happened to be very big and very long. I genuinely believe that if her rise had somehow happened like 10 years ago, people wouldn't feel nearly as fatigued. Rickroll managed to stay funny for years. The backlash feels sharper because algorithms don't really give people any time to breathe anymore. I was wondering whether people felt this way about Miku's rise. After all, she still is way more popular than Teto, but I think people don't feel as fatigued by that because that's simply the way it always has been. Miku made vocal synths as a musical tool, so people don't begrudge her position at the top too much. Of course, people do want producers to use their favourite, more niche sims, and hope that songs using lesser-known sims get more attention, but it's also kind of generally accepted within the fandom that Miku will always reign supreme. She's been established as a main Vocaloid for pretty much the last 18 years, so Teto's rise feels like a little bit of whiplash by comparison, too much too soon, which I think is why people have more of an issue with her taking over the space and seemingly pushing other voices out than when Miku does it. Plus, the internet was a different landscape back in 2007 when Miku first debuted, and during her initial years of popularity. All of the social media apps shoving Teto content down people's throats these days either didn't exist or were barely used. YouTube and Nico Nico were the main base of the fandom, and you had to actively search for the content and click on it yourself, making that choice to be exposed to whatever vocal synth you chose. Plus, even the YouTube algorithm these days seems hypersensitive to recommend you stuff based off like one video you watch that is tangentially related. Like, if I click on one video to cook one meal, suddenly my entire feed is full of cooking stuff. I just wanted to cook the single meal. And I also think it is notable that the most severe criticism is coming from sites where the content is fed to you rather than you actively searching for it yourself. It's a consequence of the algorithm pushing things too much, another change in the way people use the internet and social media, not being bothered to curate their feeds anymore and waiting for content to be fed to them. I mean, I haven't really seen any Teto fatigue on Tumblr, which I still use. It's good for fandoms, because I put a lot of effort into creating my own space on there, and in my space, I don't want to see people talking bad about Teto. When the algorithm decides for you, it is very easy to get sick of what it shows. The content is relentless, and despite any supposed fatigue, there are still millions of people still looking at Teto. People aren't really tired of her, they're tired of the internet making them tired of her. So yeah, whilst I think it is very frustrating to see Teto be pushed so much and seem to take over so much of the space, a lot of it is just down to the fact that we're in a very different internet space to older parts of the Vocaloid fandom. I think if Luca sort of had her rise in popularity like she first did when she initially released, all the way back in 2008 I think, she would similarly feel very oversaturated in the same way that Teto does. And if the fatigue discourse wasn't enough, there's another popular point that people circle back to again and again, that Teto just sounds the same in all her songs. But she's also that unique raw sound that came with her original Utao voice bank. Her sim feedback may sound less abrasive and more human, but that it's too smooth, too consistent. It feels like she's lost her edge a bit. Now, this criticism has been around even before her big blow-up, ever since the release of her Synth V voice bank, typically from older Utao and Vocaloid fans, and the debate about whether her voice is too samey has definitely resurged with her recent debut of her V2, which I feel has had a fairly mixed reaction. People who like a human-sounding voice are happy, people who prefer her to sound a bit more robotic were not. It feels like she's losing her voice in a sense, what made her originally Teto, more and more with each update. The roughness, the charm, the unique tuning styles favoured by Utao producers that made her sound distinct, they're all fading away. Her new voice is undeniably powerful and an amazing tool, clean, easy to tune, very expressive, but it definitely isn't the same Teto from 2008. But the complaints about new voice banks definitely aren't unique to Teto. A lot of people still stand by the fact that Hatsune Miku's V2 voice bank was the peak of her sound, and recent releases from Krypton have been criticised for just poor quality, as frankly, the voice banks they're releasing have been pretty subpar. The NT voice banks were very disappointing in my opinion. However, with Teto, the complaints aren't an issue of quality so much, but about the lack of uniqueness that comes with the AI tuning. I think the long history of vocal synths has led to this strange paradox within the fandom. People do want the voices to be updated, to sound fresh, to sound better, but they also don't want them to sound too real, because Vocaloid has never really been a replacement for the human voice. I think thinking of it that way is a major oversimplification of the genre. The choppy robotic sound is used for a reason. That unrealness is part of what Vocaloid is. Vocaloid fans are Vocaloid fans because they like the singing robots. There is definitely a place in the scene for human-like sims, and I'm really happy the technology has developed to the point where people can really accurately simulate the human voice. It's good for accessibility and means people have a large range of different voice banks to use, from super robotic to indistinguishable from human to the untrained ear. But the thing with Teto specifically is that again, she had this history of being used as an Utao before becoming a Symphony AI voice. That uncanny edge to her Utao voice was part of her appeal, adding to the story of her as a wannabe Vocaloid. Her voice bank had a lot of quirks, inconsistencies in tone, weird pronunciation, but producers built around those flaws. It gave her character. And you could easily tell when Teto was singing, sounding much rougher than a lot of her vocal synth contemporaries. Plus, being able to tune her well was a bit of a flex. And I will admit that before her Symphy voice bank, I never really listened to much original Teto music, but I did enjoy finding really interesting and unique covers using her voice. But obviously as a Symphy AI, she's lost her original voice. And while I don't think it's a bad thing in itself, like it opens it up to producers who might have found tuning her Utao voice bank too technical or difficult. Utao is an old software. But it does mean that across the board, she started to sound a bit too consistent. She hits every note just fine. Well, in most songs, she hits every note just fine. Every phrase flows perfectly. There's a lot less tension and grit. A lot of people will specifically take issue with the fact that she's a Symphy AI. The AI tuning tools are extremely helpful and impressive in creating a more natural human-sounding voice, but it also discourages people from trying out their own unique tuning styles, a fundamental part of Vocaloid community. It's so easy for songs to just start sounding interchangeable, especially when paired with similar mixing styles and trend following. Tuning has always been an important part of Vocaloid. I really love those tuning different parts of songs like different producers' videos, and long-term Vocaloid fans can often identify who has produced a song simply from the way the Vocaloid is tuned. But with this new version of Teto, that doesn't really seem possible anymore. And also, because so many producers started using her more or less at the same time, there's this kind of aesthetic convergence happening. Everyone seems to be using similar presets and aiming for the same kind of style. I mean, trend following is nothing new, that's exactly how the music industry and Vocaloid has always worked, and I find any kind of music production impressive, but when fans hear 10 similar Teto songs in a row from 10 different producers, it's easy to see why it feels like she's starting to lose some of her definition. This in no way means that artistry is fully gone. It's not easy to make music. I've tried, it was rubbish, that's why I'm making Vocaloid YouTube videos instead of Vocaloid music. But it's easy to see why fans are frustrated by the constant use of a voice bank that is rarely pushed beyond its default state. It's hard to strike the balance in Vocaloid between the human and the robotic, the unique and, well, the listenable. And yet, there are more Teto producers than there ever were before. Symphy is a very user-friendly software, and pretty much anyone can have access to a very easy-to-use voice bank. She's become a gateway for a new generation of producers, and plenty of them are likely to start experimenting more with other vocal synths as their careers grow. Plus, we have to remember that the reason a lot of Teto songs sound the same is because they're simply the type of songs that are more likely to go viral. A lot of it comes down to simple selection bias. And you can still be quite innovative with Teto's Symphy AI voice bank. Like, Bird Brain is extremely popular, I think most people have heard of it, but I really love the sort of use of Teto slipping up, messing up her words. It's just so interesting, and I love that usage of her voice bank. Perhaps the only disadvantage to the accessibility of her Symphy voice bank, though, is the fact that you can make a Teto song faster than ever before. And the easier something becomes to make, the faster that content will be pumped out, which brings us to my next major issue that I've seen some people talking about online, the idea of Teto slop content. If you look at a lot of the trending songs across the past couple of years, even looking at the most viewed songs of the week, you find Miku-Teto duets. Ever since the insane success of Mesmerizer, it feels like every producer is jumping on the duet bandwagon. It just makes sense to pair the biggest two vocal synths together, and a lot of these songs clearly take inspiration from the same sources, often in the same tempo range, with kind of glitchy leads and a colourful animated music video. And I do want to say, I do not think any of these songs are bad because they're Miku-Teto duets. Some are definitely better than others, which tend to blur together a bit more, but the creation of any kind of catchy hook is a huge undertaking. But the sheer density of them has made people feel tired. It feels like there's nothing new to say with this pairing. It's quite ironic in a way, because Miku-Teto's duets used to be pretty rare. They both used very different softwares, one free, one paid for, and there weren't really that many people mixing both together. Plus, the dynamic was totally different. There was a novelty to seeing a fake Vocaloid standing next to a real one and being able to hear the difference in their voices. Now, though, that subject has been almost completely forgotten. I think it's still a little bit of its shiny through in the way Teto is often cast in the role of sort of an imposter or an usurper. But ultimately, they're used together so often because this combination simply performs well algorithmically. Both characters have strong name recognition and dedicated fan bases, both have flexible voice banks that easily fit into modern production styles. And I also think their voices contrast each other really well, giving the song a bit of intrigue, making it more interesting to listen to. And since these songs do so well algorithmically, the algorithm keeps recommending them. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of sorts. The songs perform well and go viral, so that producers create more songs using them, which are then recommended based on the initial song's success, these become popular, and so on and so forth. And I don't blame any producer for doing this. If I put effort into a song, I would want people to see it. But this overflow of algorithmic recommendation has started to irritate people. And that's where the word slop starts to come in. Low effort, brainless, mass-produced internet content. A few voices have even started to call this era of Vocaloid the slop era, a wave of songs and memes and edits that seek to be designed purely for virality. Simple melodies, easy-to-loop choruses, bright colours, the bit that was clearly made to be used in an animation meme or a TikTok audio. And there are definitely a few songs coming that are perhaps a little bit soulless and just interested in cashing in on the trend. But I think that applies to very few of them overall, and even then I think the word slop is just a bit too disparaging. A lot of the songs that I've seen described as slop are just current popular Teto songs. Plus, what counts as slop depends entirely on context. What one person dismisses as lazy, another might emotionally resonate with. What feels overproduced and tacky to one fan can feel clean and professional to another. And even if a song is clearly designed with TikTok virality in mind, that doesn't make it somehow void of meaning or easy to make. Vocaloid has and always will be a deeply online music subgenre, and as such it's very trend-driven. People take a lot of inspiration from each other, and what is popular can stay popular for a while. From the early Nico Nico boom of meme songs like Popopo and Miku Miku Nishita Garu, to the wave of storytelling tracks post Kagero project, to the most recent kind of hyperpop revival, the fandom has always followed what works. There have always been waves of songs with similar themes or sounds. The difference is that now, people aren't frequently checking the Nico Nico rankings and seeing a more diverse array of releases, but instead waiting for songs to be fed to them by an algorithm. Unless you're willing to actively search for new Vocaloid music, you probably won't see much outside of Teto and Miku. So yeah, people are focused on appeasing the algorithm a lot more in the subgenre. But I think it's important to remember that trend-based music is not inherently bad. That's basically what pop music is. What's different is the visibility, the illusion of sameness that comes from algorithms constantly feeding us the most popular pieces of a trend, without the thousands of smaller, more experimental works that orbit around it. It's easy to forget that there are still countless producers making weird, beautiful, less algorithmically inclined songs that might never amass 100,000 views, but they are definitely still out there. I wish they were promoted more by the algorithm, but I also get the sense that a lot of people complaining about there being too much Teto stuff on, say, TikTok, don't put in much effort to go and find releases using different vocal synths, or promote music from smaller producers. Plus, I think the fact that recent Vocaloid songs are having very high view counts, much higher than ever seen before, has also skewed a lot of people's perception of what it actually means to be a popular Vocaloid song. Recent songs are breaking a lot of records, but it also means that every song that doesn't go insanely viral or hit 1 million views seems like a bit of a flop by comparison. Also, for anyone wondering what the best way to find new songs is, YouTube has always been the best platform for Vocaloid fans in the West. If you listen to enough, your algorithm will get accustomed to it pretty quickly, and it also pushes quite a lot of smaller channels to me, as well as mega viral hits. I would recommend the channel Vocaloid as well as a really good way to keep up with recent releases and get an idea of what's currently popular. They make weekly compilations of new songs and track what's getting the most views in a given week. And honestly, it's interesting to see that there are still other Vocaloids being used amidst all the Miku and Teto. And whilst it is frustrating, I don't think the Teto dominance will last forever. The fact people are getting a bit sick of it might indicate that she's due for a slight dip in popularity. It is very hard to tell. Plus, I think it's important to remember that only certain songs will stick in the future and become these essential pieces that must be heard by everyone in the fandom. It feels like there's so much Teto content now because we're actually living through it. My mum watches a lot of old Top of the Pops, which is an old music TV show they used to show in the UK. And as a result, I've heard a lot of 80s music that is pretty much forgotten by the mainstream these days, despite being successful at the time. So I honestly do think that if we give it 5, maybe 10 years, people will look back on this era quite fondly. After all, it's going to be a lot of people's introduction to Vocaloid music. So looking at everything, the oversaturation, accusations of slop content, the frustration of a repetitive voice bank, the fatigue of constant brain rot, the dominance of Miku-Teto duets, the feeling that she's taking songs from other sims, the tension between old and new fans, it's pretty clear that the Teto Problem is actually about 10 smaller problems in a trench coat. At the end of the day, the Teto Problem isn't really that much about Teto at all, in my opinion. I think that the Teto Problem is mainly a problem of algorithmic acceleration and changing fandom identity. 2 generations of fans looking at the same character and seeing completely different things. But ultimately, I think her popularity is anything but a disaster for Vocaloid. I joined during a pretty grim era of the fandom. We were well out of the golden era, and it felt like Vocaloid was on a steady decline, unable to maintain interest a decade after Miku's initial release. But this proves that the scene is still able to evolve, to have new eras, to put Miku in Fortnite. And who knows exactly what's going to happen from now on? My prediction is that 2025 and 2026 is probably going to be the peak of Teto saturation, and then she'll gradually dial down a bit. Vocaloid eras tend to last about 3 to 4 years, so by that time we'll be due something new. I doubt the dominance will last forever, and who knows, maybe someone will make the next Mesmerizer with Rin and Len, and they'll get to be the newest face of the fandom. Also, side note, Adachi Rei is getting a Vocaloid voice bank, so maybe she'll get to be the big new star standing next to Miku and Teto. I mean, we are kind of due an orange vocal synth. Teto's definitely not going to relinquish her position as Miku's number 2 anytime soon, but I don't think she's going to get any more popular than she currently is. It's hard to predict exactly where the fandom will go, as one big hit is often enough to start a flurry of similar songs in its wake, but one thing that can be certain is that the Vocaloid fandom never stays static. Personally, I'm praying for the vocal metal resurgence of 2026. I hope you guys also agree with my vision. But the important thing to me is that people are still creating, still listening, still joining. Teto spearheaded an entirely new chapter of Vocaloid history, and yeah, I think people will look back on it with a sort of fondness, as with everything in fandom that gets criticism when it first releases. And whether you're an older fan who misses the scrappy Utao days, or a new listener who discovered her last week for a TikTok audio, there is space for you in the fandom. There always has been. The fandom only grows because new people enter and old fans stick around to tell the stories that came before. Teto's era won't last forever, no era can, but the passion driving it will, and whatever comes next, I'm excited that we all get to experience it together. And fingers crossed, what comes next is Teto in Fortnite, no matter what Twin Droll is saying on Twitter. Thank you so much for listening. Like, comment, do all those YouTube things, subscribe, but especially comment. I really like hearing people's views on things, I like discussing things within the fandom, and this is one which I think might have a wide range of different perspectives and different thoughts and feelings on it. Let me know if you really love Teto, if you love Teto Utao, if you love Teto Symphony, if you think there actually is a Teto problem. Let me know if you're tired of her, if you're sick of her, if you want to see different vocal simps taking up the space more. This is like a kind of vaguely unscripted ramble, so sorry if I repeated myself a bunch or it comes out a little bit questionable in the editing process. I'm a student and university during November is an evil, evil time. I haven't really had any time to film anything or write anything, so I just decided that I really want to sit down and just get a video made. So yeah, like, comment, subscribe, stick around for more. I also have Miku earmuffs and I want to show these off before the video ends. They look very stupid. I really loved him a lot. So thank you for watching and goodbye.